Can you go to the market and buy the things we need for the Nigerian jollof rice? Mrs. Bamidele asked her children. They were all sitting in the living room getting ready for Christmas, which was only a few days away. Yes, mommy. Wait, there is so many things we need to buy. Jennifer replied, just write them in a list for me. We also need clothes, shoes and extra plates because we will have more visitors this December. Peter, Jennifer's brother, said with excitement. This December will be the best. Peter shouted. We will have plenty of food and drinks. Mr. Bamidele walked into the room, smiling. Yes, we will spend a lot of money this Christmas, he said, laughing. The Bamidele family was happy as they planned for Christmas. But little did they know that something bad was coming their way. Grace, the oldest child, walked into the room. She was quiet and moved slowly. She sat on a chair, looking at nothing in particular. The room became silent. Everyone wondered why Grace was so quiet. Grace, can you go to the goat seller and ask him the price for his big goats? We will need about 3 or 4. Mr. Bamidele said to his daughter. Grace didn't answer. She seemed lost in her thoughts. Peter gently tapped her hand and she jerked back to reality. Why are you so deep in thought? Mrs. Bamidele asked, looking concerned. I was just thinking we shouldn't spend too much this Christmas. Grace replied, we should focus on our goals for next year. There are so many bills waiting to be paid. Grace, Christmas comes only once a year. Jennifer, our younger sister, said with a smile. We need to celebrate it with our family and friends. Mr. Bamidele's face changed and he spoke in an angry tone. Grace, did I give birth to you? Or did you give birth to me? If you don't go to the goat seller now, I promise you will be in hot soup. By the time I open my eyes and see you still sitting here, he threatened. Scared her father might beat her, Grace quickly ran out of the house and headed to the goat seller. The next day, the children followed Mrs. Bamidele to the market. They bought so many things. Food ingredients for Nigerian jollof rice, fried rice, vegetable oil, bags of peppers and tomatoes, a bag of rice, seasonings, beans for moi moi, yam flour and other things they needed for the Christmas celebration. Mrs. Bamidele also bought new clothes and shoes for herself and the children. They had to dress well for church on Christmas morning. After all, if they didn't dress well, other church members will mock them and flaunt their own clothes, thinking they couldn't afford new clothes. Mr. Bamidele didn't leave himself out. He bought a brand new Yoruba attire, shoes, a wristwatch, a Yoruba cap and even a golden walking stick to complete his majestic Christmas look. They all took their new clothes to the fashion designer, who promised to sew their clothes in the latest styles, so the family will look their best for Christmas. The Bamideles has used all their savings for Christmas. As soon as Mr. Bamidele received his December salary, he was paid early because of the festive season. He quickly used the money to buy the goats. He bought 4 large ones, just as planned. But his salary as an office clerk in a small business wasn't enough to cover the cost. He had to beg the goat seller to allow him take them home, promising to pay the balance after receiving his January salary. The seller, seeing Mr. Bamidele's desperation, reluctantly agrees. Meanwhile, Mrs. Bamidele, who was a full-time housewife, kept busy making plans for the party. She made a long list of guests, meals and decorations. Since they were expecting many visitors, they also rented chairs and tents for the event. But like the goats, the money wasn't enough to pay in full. Mr. Bamidele convinced the rental company to allow them pay later. By the time they were fully ready for Christmas, The Bamideles were drowning in debt, but they didn't scare. They believed that celebrating Christmas in a grand way would bring blessings from God. Grace, their firstborn, watched everything unfold quietly. She noticed the struggle her father went through to borrow and promise payment. She saw how her mother focused on making the Christmas perfect, even though there wasn't much money left for the family's real needs. Grace couldn't understand it. She wondered why her parents would choose to spend so much money on one day when they already had bills piling up. She thought about the school fees due in January and the many other expenses the family would face. Still, the excitement in the house was hard to ignore. Peter and Jennifer were trying on their new clothes and imagining how their friends at church would admire them. They talked non-stop about the food they would eat and the fun they would have. Even Mr. Bamidele seemed proud of his efforts, despite the debt hanging over their heads. Grace, however, felt uneasy. She didn't share her family's excitement. Deep down, she worried about what would happen when the festivities were over and the bills started coming in. The Bamideles often discussed how they would be the talk of the town after Christmas. This year, they were determined to outshine their neighbors, the Williams family, who lived in the next flat. Last year, the Williams family had slaughtered 2 goats, while the Bamideles could only afford 1. Although the Williams family never said anything about it, the Bamideles believed their neighbors looked at them with tears that silently said, "We are better than you." This Christmas, the Bamideles planned to change the narrative. They would proudly flaunt their 4 goats, making it clear to everyone that they were not to be looked down upon. When Christmas morning finally came, the Bamideles dressed elegantly for church. Their outfit sparkled and their confidence radiated. Mr. Bamidele looked regal in his Yoruba attire with his golden walking stick. Mrs. Bamidele's dress was so vibrant. Jennifer and Peter wore matching outfits, and Grace looked graceful, although her face carried a quiet expression. As the family entered the church, all eyes turned to them. Whispers spread quickly among the congregation. Everyone admired how stunning they looked, and some even felt jealous. Their rivals in church, who had always competed with them silently, were left speechless. By the end of the service, the entire church was talking about the Bamideles. Some members whispered near Mrs. Bamidele, saying, "That family must be the richest in the church." Hearing this, Mrs. Bamidele's chest swelled with pride. As they drove home in their family car, she couldn't stop boasting. "Did you hear what they were saying? They think we are the richest family in church," she said, laughing. Grace, sitting quietly in the back seat, thought to herself, "So, the way we dressed had made us the wealthiest members of the church. People are so funny." Meanwhile, Mr. Bamidele had announced during the service that he was inviting everyone to their Christmas party. He had already invited family friends, colleagues and relatives. Earlier in the week, those who could make it promised to come. The Bamideles were ready to host a grand celebration that would make them the center of attention in both the church and their neighborhood. Soon, many people started arriving at the Bamideles' Christmas party, exchanging pleasantries and sharing laughter. Even people who weren't invited but were looking for places to eat Christmas rice found their way to the party. Meanwhile, the Williams' flat next door was unusually quiet. There were no visitors, no music, and no sign of celebration. The Bamideles noticed this and felt victorious, believing they had finally gotten their revenge. Music blared from the speakers as the children danced happily, showing off their new clothes. Adults sat in groups, dining and chatting, while the atmosphere was filled with joy and excitement. Food was served generously. Plates of amala, Pounded yam, moi moi, and steaming rice were passed around. The aroma of grilled meat filled the air. As guests enjoyed every bite, it was a feast to remember. When the party ended, the Bamideles were proud of how grand it had been. Their home was the center of attention, and they believed everyone would talk about their party for weeks. However, by the end of the day, their pockets were empty. They had no money left, though there was still some meat and food remaining. For the next few days, the family ate to their fill, enjoying the leftovers from the party. But reality soon hit. 2 weeks after New Year, when the children were set to resume school, things have taken a difficult turn. The family were struggling. Mr. Bamidele, overwhelmed by unpaid debts and bills, had to ask for a salary advance from his workplace. As the days went by, their situation grew worse. They had spent everything trying to impress others and now had little to fall back on. Despite their struggles, the Bamideles continued to maintain appearance. They wanted people to believe they were still a big and wealthy family. But behind closed doors, they borrowed food items just to feed the children before school. The strain was visible, but the family kept pretending, hoping no one would notice their difficulties. One day, the Bamidele children had nothing to eat. Mrs. Bamidele, desperate, decided to visit a regular lender, hoping to get some food items on credit. Mrs. Bamidele did not see her neighbor, Mrs. Williams, who was buying a few things at the counter, and she began begging the store owner for help. "Please, I just need a little food. I promise to pay back soon," she pleaded. Suddenly, a familiar voice interrupted her. "Mrs. Bamidele?" She froze, then turned around to suddenly see Mrs. Williams standing behind her. Embarrassed, she stammered, "Oh, good afternoon, Mrs. Williams." Mrs. Williams gave her a curious look but said nothing. They exchanged a few polite words before Mrs. Bamidele quickly collected what she could and left the store. When she returned home, the children who had been sent away from school because of unpaid school fees were sitting quietly. As soon as Mrs. Williams arrived to visit, the children were asked to excuse the adults so they could talk. At first, Mrs. Bamidele hesitated to open up. So after some gentle persuasion, she finally told Mrs. Williams everything: the debt, the unpaid school fees, and their struggles to feed the family. Mrs. Williams sighed deeply. "I am so sorry about what you are going through," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. She paused for a moment before continuing. "But let me tell you something, Mrs. Bamidele. Last year, when we slaughtered 2 goats, it was because it was convenient for us. We had extra money and it didn't affect our plans. But this year, things are different. There are so many bills and projects we are handling. So we decided not to cook anything big for Christmas." My children understood when I explained it to them. Instead of making unnecessary expenses, I bought them just a few things, just to mark the season. We celebrated without letting it affect our daily needs or goals. Mrs. Williams leaned forward and added firmly, "Christmas is a time to celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ. Yes, but you have to celebrate according to your level. If you try to live above your means, January will punish you for it. And remember, January has 31 days, but it always feels like 91 days. She gave Mrs. Bamidele a compassionate look and continued, "It is not about how much you spend or how grand your celebration is. The real embarrassment is when you cannot afford to take care of your family after the celebration is over." Mrs. Bamidele nodded slowly, taking in every word. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of clarity. Mrs. Williams continued, "Another thing you do not realize is how overspending affects all the plans you have already set for the new year. For example, when the whole of January is spent on debt, it is not that the debt disappears, it keeps piling up, and soon it begins to affect January and the month after. Don't get me wrong," she added. "Celebrating Christmas is a good thing, but you must always remember that January is waiting for you right after. Celebrate wisely and within your means. Hearing this, Mr. and Mrs. Bamidele finally realized their mistakes. They took Mrs. Williams' advice to heart and decided to change their ways. Going forward, they planned their finances more carefully, and gradually, their financial life improved. They learned to balance celebration with responsibility, ensuring they never found themselves in such a difficult position again. Moral lesson: this story isn't meant to discourage anyone from celebrating Christmas. Instead, it is a reminder to celebrate according to your level. No go dey do pass yourself. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment and share. Don't forget to subscribe to African Folktales with Temille Deebs and click the notification button. Stay updated whenever we upload a new video. We'd love to hear from you. Comment below what you learned from this story and where you are watching from. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.